Hey everyone, Ivy League Gaming here, and today we're playing Raid Shadow Legends, and it is time for a new rotation of Hydra. Today we are talking Rotation 6. I really appreciated the feedback I got on my last Hydra rotation video, so I wanted to make sure I continue that series. This is also to go along with an article that will be on hellhades.com, so I'll be sure to link that as well. My video will also be linked on the site, but I will be writing this kind of down in written form if that's something you prefer, or for a good reference to look back to later. So when we're talking Hydra, every rotation brings a different set of heads in the starting rotation, and it also brings different affinities. So there's a couple factors to look into when planning your teams. Overall, if you're trying to be the most successful you possibly can be in Hydra, especially pushing Brutal and Nightmare Hydra, you're going to want to be looking at all 6 heads, not just the starting rotation. So please keep that in mind when building your teams. If you want to reduce the amount of RNG factor and frustration when a head you don't like pops back up that you weren't planning for, well, plan for all 6 heads. Luckily for this rotation, that's actually quite easy to do. I would say that that's because this is actually probably one of the hardest rotations, because the 2 most difficult heads are you need specific things for. Actually, I can't say that. Every head needs very specific things, kind of, except for these 2 heads. These 2 heads bring a factor of needing what? Maybe block buffs into the mix, but you're going to want to have block buffs up with these other heads anyway. So this doesn't really actually affect too much, except for here, the added resistance from Head of Suffering, which you should just plan for anyway. So let's take a look here. What do we have in the starting rotation? We have the Head of Decay. Now, the Head of Decay is magic affinity this rotation. So keep that in mind when you're planning your provokers. So make sure that you are not using a very force-heavy team if that's what your provoker is. So think Husk. He might not be as useful this rotation if you're really needing him as a backup provoker. This might be the rotation to put your Royal Guard in and plan to use someone else as a backup provoker. So that's the first element you really need to plan for. Honestly, just everyone, try to plan for a provoker. It's just such a big deal when the Head of Decay pops out. So one good thing that I could note is, even though Cantra is force affinity, she places provoke with her passive. Well, I guess it's her passive at the start of her turn. So if a champion is placing a debuff, you don't have to worry about any affinity, because you don't have to worry about a weak hit. If you weak hit, you cannot place a debuff, or land a debuff. Except there are some strange kits that allow it to work anyway, or there are ones that have it directly written, like Bivald. Bivald says he still can place these debuffs even if weak hit. That's a pretty valuable skill right there, especially for Hydra. But yeah, when we're talking Head of Decay, try to bring in magic, spirit, or void affinities overall for provoking to be on the safe side. Next, we have the Head of Torment. So the Head of Torment in the starting rotation, you guys know what that means. That means dust off those Shamels if you've put them in the vault. I mean, at least for lower levels, it's going to be really valuable to have Shamel in your lower levels of Hydra, because more than likely the Head of Torment's going to stay out there versus not. I mean, I can't imagine actually using Shamel anymore in Nightmare or Brutal Hydra, no matter the rotation, because he just doesn't bring enough to the table overall. But depending on how you balance things, you could use him pretty well in lower levels like hard and normal. So I actually really like using him for hard. I did a really awesome key with him, which I'm going to show future videos for. I think I'm hoping tomorrow I end up posting one of those really nice videos showcasing my hard Hydra team with Dilesia and Inquisitor Shamel, and he's really, really good for those lower levels, and you can put him in a toxic step for some extra damage, or with poisons, or just make him built for damage. You can put him in taunting set for an extra helping the Head of Decay get provoked. There's a lot of ways you can think about building Shamel, and he can be really useful against the Head of Torment thanks to his passive and his A1 skills. I also should mention a big factor, a better better, well, not factor, a better counteract to the Head of Torment would be a perfect Val. Duchess is the queen of Hydra, sort of. There's some others that we could say are above her, but she's a queen of Hydra for good reason as well. She brings perfect Val, and besides having perfect Val, she brings a great aura. She puts block debuffs, increase attack, and she's just so good with her damage mitigation passive. And of course, she's a reviver, and when she revives, she puts continuous heal on everyone. So she just brings so much to the table for Hydra. And if you have a Duchess, you should probably put her with your hardest key, the hardest level you hit, for sake of Hydra, for overall protection for your team, and to deal with the Head of Torment. She is just a queen. There's also some really great Perfect Veil champions. I mean, we're getting more and more that do it now, but the best ones would probably be worth noting Tatura, Rhymehide. He also brings block debuffs and increased defense buffs. That's really helpful, and he has increase or decrease accuracy on his A1. And then we have Truoth, who is a newer champion. You might have forgot about him, but he's actually quite good for Hydra as well, and does bring a lot of utility. He can be a Mischief target, actually, thanks to himself buffing, and he also brings a heal and HP balance to the team. So that's just something really useful that you might better use for someone you probably forgot about, because he's a little bit new and not as talked about when it comes to Hydra, but absolutely viable. Now, we're on to the Head of Mischief, right? You guys know I've talked a lot about Mischief targeting. When it comes to dealing with the Head of Mischief, well, block buffs is even better, to be honest. If you can keep block buffs up the entire time from an Ugo, an Uko, a debuff extender, keeping those alive like Solus or Thylesia, then you don't even have to worry about a Mischief target. But Mischief is magic this rotation, so keep that in mind. You're not going to want a spirit-based champion for placing those important buffs or to have an AoE smash. Now, luckily, you don't have to worry about that, really. There's really not, I can't really think of any good, or if there is, block buffs champions that are spirit. So, meh, I think we're good. I think all the ones we talk about are Magic Force or Void, so I think we're pretty good for handling the Head of Mischief this rotation. Also keep in mind, if you don't have Hex in your team, then it can be hard to hit the Head of Mischief and take back a devoured champion. So having a good AoE smasher that's the right affinity to counteract Mischief is important as well. So that's where, I mean, this rotation's again great. Husk is great if you just need him for damage and you don't need him for provoke, or just a slight backup provoke, because like I mentioned earlier, affinity wise, not good for Decay. Royal Guard, of course, is great, and also the same affinity, so that's fine. Acresia would be the queen, of course, if you have her. And then there's also some other champions you can consider, like Solus, Coronar, Trunda, and stuff that do other damage that are not enemy max HP. So keep that in mind for the Head of Mischief. This rotation, it should be pretty easy to deal with him, including, I mean, you don't really have to worry about it, even for your Mischief target, because your Mischief target, if it's a spirit, it doesn't really matter. You're just going to take a bigger hit. I don't know. It's not a big deal, honestly, because the Mischief target is not like placing your debuffs. They're just putting buffs on themselves. So luckily, when it comes to Mischief targeting, you don't really have to worry about affinity there too much. But we will go on to the Head of Wrath also in the starting rotation. So with the Head of Wrath here, you guys know he smashes and he can just one-shot a whole team. And he is Force Affinity this round, so there's a lot of favorable magic champions, especially to use in lower levels of Hydra, that you might not want to use this rotation because he's going to hit them extra hard affinity-wise. So those Trundas, your ninjas, your Royal Guards might have a little bit of trouble surviving if they're a little bit squishy. So make sure you have damage mitigation on your team. If you're going to bring in any magic heavy people, or like Mighty Uko, you should have her, or Mighty Uko, Ugo, not Mighty Uko. Oh god, their names confuse me. Ugo, she's magic. Luckily, you should have build her pretty tough because she's going to be healing, and it's based on her HP, so she should be fine against the Head of Wrath. But for the most part, be careful of those magic champions in your roster if you don't have good survivability on them. Damage mitigation can be there in so many different forms. You want to place a decrease attack debuff on the Head of Wrath. You also want to make sure you have block buffs put up or someone that can steal buffs to deal with his increased attack buff that he places on himself. And of course, you have general damage mitigation like Duchess's passive, which is wonderful. Perfect Val actually mitigates damage as well, so that really goes good together here with the Head of Torment in the rotation and provides even more value for someone like Duchess. It's just a really great skill to have in this current rotation. And then, of course, shields, block damage, increase defense, revive on death. Those are all really helpful things to deal with the Head of Wrath. Anything that's going to help you either take a lighter hit or be able to pop right back up. So having a solid reviver on the team is also very smart when the Head of Wrath is around. And we'll scroll down here to the Head of Suffering and Head of Blight for sake of discussion. It is important. Like I said, you should prepare for all 6 heads. So preparing for these 2, you really just want block buffs. That's the most important thing here. And luckily, we should have no problem there if you're using the amazing Ugo as your block buff champion, which you should. I have 3 built with 0 regret. I use all 3, every Hydra key when I can, except for creating content sake and trying to I don't know, trying to mix it up a little bit, but I love Ugo so much and absolutely worth using. In this rotation, she's favorable for these 2 heads, so no worries there, especially if you're using Ugo in particular. So keep that in mind. You might have trouble placing if it's Spirit again, which it shouldn't be an issue, or if it is Force for the Head of Suffering at least, but hopefully you'll get lucky if you're only doing lower levels of Hydra, and these heads don't pop back up, but to be honest, they're not too bad. They're really not too bad. The only Head of Blight can be incredibly debilitating to your team and your damage if you let the poison clouds start to fly. But if you have block buffs, which you should have for a couple of these heads anyway, then you don't have to worry about it at all. Of course, I'll quick mention the backup of if block buffs can't stay up very well. Having a place of HP burn is very valuable if the Head of Blight does pop back up, so keep that in mind as well. So I will probably say for this rotation, our MVP is Duchess. If I just had to pick one champion for this rotation that you should absolutely have in your arsenal, if you can, if you have one. I know we don't all have Duchess, but I've still got to say it. She is just so good. As mentioned, her passive just mitigates damage from AoEs. That's going to help with the Head of Wrath. Her revive includes continuous heal and a veil, which is great. And she puts perfect veil on everyone as well. So there you go. Dealing with the Head of Torment is so easy. You can allow everyone to attack the Head of Torment and not get those fears popping. Except be careful. Remember, she does not put perfect veil on herself. So that means do not attack the Head of Torment with her. Keep that in mind as well. But she's so good. Duchess is probably the queen of this rotation. I'm going to give a nod for damage, though. If we want to talk damage, she's probably the best support. Obviously, Acrizia is just good for everything, period. I don't think that's really a question. But our king of everything, Geomancer, one of the most wanted epics in the game as of late, as for many reasons, he's kind of the MVP here too. When the Head of Wrath is out, that's going to mean more damage is around for sake of his passive. This is going to provide so much damage when the Head of Wrath is in the starting rotation. You're going to start off with a nice strong boost of damage and hope that the Head of Wrath sticks around. And actually don't try to kill the Head of Wrath if you can. Let him stick around and hit you hard as long as you're surviving, because that's going to allow his passive to rack up some serious damage. So we love our Geomancers for Hydra for a good reason, and this rotation is no different. But alright guys, that's all for now. I hope you appreciate these videos. I'll be sure to do one every rotation of Hydra, and be sure to check out my Hydra related articles on hellhades.com. I'll see you guys in the next video.